November Madness Part 2. The bracket continues on today's Upshot, Ulti-World Disc Golf's podcast about the latest in the disc golf world. Charlie, Josh, with you. And we are into the quarterfinal round of our Storylines bracket. If you missed our last episode, go ahead and pause. Check that out. We did the round of 16. We had a play-ins, all that good stuff. And so we're on to quarters, and we're going to go through quarter semis and finals today and pick our storyline of the year in 2023. Now, before we dive into all that, a couple things. First of all, possession arrow currently favors me. So if there's a disagreement, I will win the next battle if we do not agree. And the other thing I want to note is that we would encourage you to get an Ulti-World Disc Golf subscription, because we're going to discuss this year's storylines bracket and compare it to last year's storylines bracket in our subscriber bonus segment Inside the Circle. So we're going to dive into, like thinking about the stories from last year and how they compare to the stories from this year. What are feeling like what's been the more impactful season? What's more resonant to us now as we've kind of had these two full-fledged seasons post-COVID, and we kind of look ahead into the future in a more sort of stable platform of disc golf. So we will be discussing that in the sub-bonus segment. Josh,
yes.
Before we go further, I wanted to, speaking of brackets, what do you think about the NBA in-season tournament? For those who are unaware, they've basically created a little mini tournament inside of the season. The games both count towards the tournament and towards the regular season results that will get teams into the playoffs for their normal playoffs. They're kind of trying to do like an FA Cup type of thing in the middle of the season. So this has been going for a couple of weeks here, and I'm curious what you think about this.
So what's interesting to me, I don't watch a ton of basketball, but I consume a lot of NBA news. That's my primary means of engagement with sports outside of hockey and football. Is I don't watch as much, but I love to read the news and follow the team storylines, trades. Like that's how I engage with sports a lot. So I read tons and tons of NBA news, watch a little bit of basketball. And I have seen so little mention or talk about the significance of this tournament. Like, I forgot that it's happening. It's like I knew it was happening. I was like, oh, cool, the tournament starts. Like, this is gonna be interesting to see. And then all the coverage of the NBA hasn't even, it's just pretended that it doesn't exist.
They asked some player, before the first game, what do you think about the new NBA in-season tournament? And he was like, I'm going to be honest, I really don't know what's going on. We're just going to try to win the game.
So I read an article. It was like, oh, the most difficult groups. And I was like, ooh, interesting. I love group discussion articles. I think it's fascinating. And then I read it, and then I literally have not seen a single thing about the tournament other than that. It falls flat for me.
It'll get there, I think.
I hope so.
In the bracket, I think teams are going to play a little harder.
I hope so.
We'll see.
I hope so, because it's
definitely not as interesting as the Upshot storylines bracket.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's get into it. I will say the FA Cup is cool. So I think there's an opportunity for American sports to try something like this.
Yeah.
And the middle of the NBA season is incredibly boring and nobody cares. So anything to keep it interesting before the football season ends. All right, here we go. Here are your matchups. Once again, if you forgot, it's the 1 versus the 9, transgender and United Series and all of that versus Isaac Robinson winning 2 majors. The 4 versus the 5, Kristen Grand Slam versus the Parody Era. Calvin's season up against the DGPT merging with the Euro Tour, the 6 versus the 14. And then the 2 versus the 7, Gannon and the Prodigy lawsuit up against Simon going to MVP. Why don't we start on the bottom of the bracket this time? So, okay. Josh, I will read it off to you here first. It's Gannon and Prodigy's lawsuit and all of that news going up against Simon to MVP.
I'm so mad that we started at the bottom because I wanted to give this one to you. I didn't want to have to decide this one. Oh, crap. It's so interesting because you have a decision, or you have like a story that, as you talked about in the last show, could shape the way that sponsorships are kind of engaged, negotiated with, buyout clauses, right, and could shape contracts moving forward, up against the most impactful contract of the past 5 years, 4 years, whenever Macbeth's deal was signed. This one is so hard.
I think this is easily the toughest matchup of the quarterfinals round.
I'm gonna make the case. I really think it can go either way, but I'm gonna make the case why I think it should be Simon, and then I want to hear what you think. The Gannon Prodigy lawsuit is like I kind of talked about with when Macbeth, with his streak at Worlds ending, was the inevitable consequence of, or the inevitable like stage that we had to get to with the way that disc golf sponsorships were initially set up, with handshake and verbal agreements, to the professionalization due to the amount of money that was in some of these contracts, right? We don't get to this stage without contracts like Paul and Ricky and Simon's. Because otherwise, handshake deals are fine still, because there's just not enough money changing hands to create the environment in which real litigation is necessary to enforce these contracts. As soon as the money that came from sponsorships like Simon's and those that came before became involved, it was inevitable that players were going to challenge their agreements until we found the line, and a manufacturer said no. That was the case when Paul left Innova, when Ricky left Innova, with Chris leaving Prodigy, with Paige leaving DD, right? Go through the list every time we got closer and closer to this stage. And this was the inevitable consequence, but it is the inevitable consequence of Simon's deals and those like it. That's why it has to go to Simon.
I really go back and forth. But I think I'm not going to take the same approach that you did, because I think you made a good case for the concept that you discussed. But I would say this. What felt like it had more resonance over the course of the season as a storyline? Simon.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. There was a bunch of smoke and around the lawsuit. People couldn't believe the Prodigy sued, but then some people were like, no, like they're in the right. And then people, it was like this like little mini war that then got settled, as these things do. And then nothing.
God.
Because that's exactly how it goes.
Yeah.
And, maybe in the future, this will kind of reignite when Gannon is off of that contract, and maybe he wants to speak more freely about the Prodigy situation.
I hope he does. Gannon, please, you tell us when.
You say the word, buddy.
We will be here.
But like from the overall course of the season, like the Simon MVP news, like that rocked people's worlds. People couldn't believe Simon was leaving Discmania. Crush Boys broken up. Like, and then him winning again after everybody said he wasn't going to win, aka Josh, aka Hater. And then, they come out with the Simon line, which can you just, I know we said it at the time, and I'm sure they thought of it already too, but just like, they're like, you just have to call it the Simon line. And they did. And it's just beautiful thing. It's a beautiful
so
thing.
Good.
And I don't know, it just feels like it has a lot more staying power as a storyline. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm with you. I think we're going to see this upset right here in Simon. The MVP was underseeded. That's all I'm saying.
It was. I really thought Gannon Prodigy was going to go all the way, but you're right. I mean, it really does feel like it fizzled
all right.
out. Next up, the 6th seed, Calvin's disappointing dominant season with some lackluster factors to it. That's the 6th seed going up against the 14 seed, Disc Golf Pro Tour merging with the Euro Tour.
I mean, this is just a pure storylines department one. Like, okay, business side, blah, blah, blah. What was the story this year? Calvin was a story this year. I don't need
Yep.
to say anything else. It has to be Calvin.
Yep. Yeah,
Let's not dwell on it. I mean,
I agree with you.
all right, on we go.
Given that we are making the decision in terms, like you said, and not necessarily about like the long-term ramifications, but just the true storylines of the season, Calvin
You have
gets
to
the nod.
include the potential future as part of the conversation, but
But it can't be all of it.
all right. So Josh, Kristen Grand Slam versus the parody era, the 4 versus the 5.
You know, man, I think this one is also pretty easy. I mean, Kristen's Grand Slam was central to every discussion, both around FPO and MPO even at times, where like the parody era was spoken of in contrast with how the FPO has entered into the Paul Macbeth-like era, right? Like it you could not even talk about MPO disc golf without getting mention of Kristen, because when you wanted to say like and talk about records, when you wanted it, like Kristen was breaking them and had to be included in those discussions. The parody era is interesting. It is, and we talked about it a lot, but the staying power of Kristen's Grand Slam season is one that I think as a single player has a level of dominance that could carry her all the way to the finals.
And here's what's crazy, I think. You look around the rest of the 2023 season, and there was a lot of winners in FPO. Silva Sarnen, winning in Europe. Holland Hanley wins at Throw Pink. Haley King. Owen Scoggins. Valerie Mondahano. Missy Gannon, of course. You could go down the list, right? Some silver winners like Allie Smith. And yet, despite all of that, right? Paige Pierce, Katrina, despite all of those players getting wins, Kristen rose above that and not only won the majors, but largely dominated the majors. And that was, I mean, she was the star of the year.
Yeah.
It was incredible. Even if it wasn't always dramatic going into the final round, but like you couldn't help but just appreciate the greatness. She's by far the most popular FPO player on tour.
Is she the most popular player in the world right now?
I don't want to front run the fandom survey, which by the time this comes out, the fandom survey might be released.
So I'm talking last year's fandom survey put Kristen as number one. Yeah, I don't know the details of this year's fandom survey. So whatever that is, don't worry, Jesse. I'm not trying to spoil it.
It might not be a spoiler. We're not sure.
Who knows? Last year, Kristen was the most popular player on Earth. Full stop.
Yes. And so I'm with you. I think that it feels bad that the parody era is losing here in the second round.
It does.
But like Kristen was just such a monster story this season that it just it outweighs the exciting chase card victories and all that other stuff, because a Grand Slam, like that is a huge deal. We've only seen it twice ever in disc golf. Macbeth did it in 15, and now Kristen did it in 23.
Yeah,
she could be cementing herself as obviously one of the greatest ever. Can she have enough longevity to pass Paige? That's the question.
That's the question. Yeah.
All right.
Last quarterfinals. Issues around transgender participation in FPO / the United Series goes up against Isaac Robinson winning 2 majors.
All right, Isaac. Well, I already gave you the upset once, and so I'm going to not do it again. Sorry. There's the transgender story was it was just a monster. It just consumed everything, because not only was it like a big competitive question in disc golf, but it's like such a wedge issue that it's like all people talk. I mean, how many times do we do shows about this? Like at least 4 or 5 shows this year.
Like emergency shows too, where we weren't going to record and then we had to record.
I did a reacts in the middle of the night in Europe when the United Series stuff came out by myself.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
It was just all consuming. I hope for all of us that it's not next year. We don't know what they're going to do next year. But like that uncertainty is also makes this part of the story. Like it's just this an easy win for the 1 seed here in the second round.
Yeah. It's too bad because Isaac would have made this an all player sweep where player beats out on course beats out off course for everything, which I don't think is usually the case. I think you usually at least have one or two off course that keep carrying.
Yeah. So here's the semifinals. It's issues around transgender participation in FPO. The 1 seed up against Kristen Grand Slam, the 4 seed, and then big upsets on the other side. Calvin season, the 6 seed, up against Simon signing with MVP, the 7 seed. And so that's your semis, and we're going to talk about who's going to the finals right after this. The Upshot is presented by Pound Disc Golf, makers of the best bags in the sport. Now you need to make sure you pay attention next week. Black Friday's coming up. And I just got the word from Levi Buckingham that the 2022 Big Germ Octothorpes are going to be $100 off. So you got to make sure you tune in next week to our Thanksgiving episode to get the details on how to save $100 on an Octothorpe. So go to pounddiscgolf.com and peruse all of their options today. Welcome back to the Upshot as we reach the semifinals round. Transgender issues versus Kristen Grand Slam. Calvin season versus Simon to MVP. Josh, I'll let you pick the one you want to talk about first.
So the one that I get to decide?
That you get to decide. Well, or at least get to talk about first.
Okay.
Possession arrow is still in my favor, I believe.
Yeah, it is. So I'm gonna go with the transgender participation in FPO United Series versus Kristen Grand Slam.
Take it away.
I think the biggest knock against the transgender participation is there's 2 things to me. Number 1, it felt like even when this was the biggest story, that Kristen still managed to transcend above that storyline in most instances. The one exception was the cancellation of FPO, which was then quickly dealt with within a couple of days. I think if you had missed even one tournament due to the cancellation of FPO, then that changes. But otherwise, I think Kristen typically inside of a tournament would be able to rise above that. Number 2 is as soon as the United Series was announced, this issue was dead in the water. We didn't talk about it again after that. And whether that's like fatigue of the issue, the fact that Natalie Ryan didn't play well after the United Series was announced, or what have you, the lawsuits were gone. Natalie wasn't playing well, so there wasn't issues around like payouts or controversy there. There was like it removed all teeth from this issue in a at least any teeth, like meaningful teeth in terms of conflict around the problem. Given that's the case, I think that Kristen's season has to take the cake, because until a more permanent decision and kind of, I think they've put a Band-Aid on this solution or on this problem that eventually is going to get made one way or the other. And at that point, we will have a storyline that probably will carry the bracket because it's going to reignite it all over again. But this Band-Aid has just made so many people apathetic about this issue for the last third of the season that I think Kristen's Grand Slam is going to have some historic staying power and should get the upset.
Wow. Oh. You make good points. I think the issue is that we came into the year and this was the topic. And like people were arguing about it, and then boom, the lawsuit comes out at OTB in California. And
please, round one.
Like, do not forget, how crazy just that part of this was, right? It goes to a district federal court. The judge rules in favor of Natalie Ryan. Then it goes to the appellate court. Natalie has played the first round. The appellate court says, you don't have jurisdiction here, Natalie Ryan. And so we nullify, I don't know what the right legal terminology is. At one point
Overturn?
I did, but essentially overturned the ruling and said, there's no jurisdiction here. And so boom, she's out of the tournament. Then it goes to Minnesota, sues, wins in the courts there. She has to play. We have the FPO. Josh, this was a monster story for the entire season until it went to quiet. And I agree that people are sick of talking about it. But it just feels like that was so significant that it's hard for me to say that Kristen's Grand Slam season, as impressive as it was, should overcome how much room it took up in the news on this extremely divisive topic that is being dealt with across America right now, not just in the disc golf world.
The problem to me, though, is that the United Series proves that this didn't need to be the issue that it was.
Well, I agree with you there.
It was the PGA shooting themselves in the foot.
Monster blunder by the PGA.
You know the meme where the guy sticks a stick in the spokes of his own bike and then falls over and is like, social issues. That's what it feels like the PDGA did this year. I just think man, and you're right, but I look back and this blunder is going to get resolved in the bigger, the broader context, and it's going to move beyond disc golf to this broader context eventually. I don't know when, but the fact that it was a self-inflicted screw up that then was resolved with a solution that I think is sufficient in keeping lawsuits out and letting Natalie play that. I think that combo to me just means we're going to look back in 10 years and we'll talk about it, but Kristen's is going to be a history book that pops up in graphics and that we talk about.
That's true.
And to
That's
the
true.
broader context of disc golf, I think Kristen's season means more.
Yes, I agree that it means more in the long run. But what was the storyline of 2023, Josh? What was the bigger storyline of 2023?
I think a lot of people would say it's Kristen. The United Series just took all the air out of the transgender conflict. The conflict around transgender participation.
I don't want to be clouded by the fact that Kristen was the expected winner of these tournaments, because even though that's true, it's still an incredible achievement to win at Champions Cup on a long wooded track where she blew everybody away by 10 plus strokes. And then what was the next one?
European Open.
Was it World?
Where she won by 16 strokes? And it was done by round 1.5?
Clowned on everybody. It was a complete beatdown. Then we go to Worlds. She has to battle.
But
it's not a walkover.
Wins by 4?
Missy Gannon's putting pressure and still able to persevere, pull away, and come up with those clutch shots when she needed them the most on two very different styles, of course. And then we go to North Carolina for U.S. Women's. And again, she has to grind. And she's able to grind. She won in different ways. She won on different courses. She won in different styles. She won all of the big tournaments for the first time ever in FPO. Oh, man. At the end of the day, this is a sport. And the on-course accomplishments at the highest level are what we care about and want to talk about. And so, Josh, you've convinced me. I'm going to go with Christian Grand Slam advancing. I really did not think I was going to do that.
You know, I didn't either. I didn't think you would either. And that's why I started with this one, because I thought I'd get you to use your possession arrow so I could hold it for the next semis or finals. All right.
It's just, yeah. The transgender story was explosive because it's like this very partisan issue. But ultimately, like, it went out with such a whimper that, like, it doesn't feel like it actually, like, defined anything on the actual course.
Like, maybe if Natalie had won an event. But, yeah. Anyway, okay.
Anyway, on we go. 6 and 7 seed, Calvin Season versus Simon to MVP.
That's you.
I guess I'm going first.
Yep.
Okay. Simon MVP. Short and sweet. Now, here's why.
Hang on. Let me. Can I just remind you of the last phrase that you said with the Kristen debate? That this is a sport and on-course performance is truly what matters. Okay. All right. Yep. I just want to make sure. Go ahead.
Calvin did not win all the majors, Josh.
True.
If I need to remind you that.
Trust me. I am the last one you need to remind about that.
I just think that Simon to MVP, as you said correctly, this is the biggest, most influential sponsorship move since Paul. And I think it's going to reshape MVP for forever. I think it's going to enrich Simon in a way commensurate to his value over the long run. I think that it shows that there's still significant power in the hands of the players, even as we saw like a big victory for Prodigy with the lawsuit against Gannon. But the players are still the ones who kind of like are why people tune in. And if you are popular enough and genuine enough, like Simon is, and obviously talented enough, you are going to be able to command significant money and make a future for yourself and your family. And Calvin's season was good, but like it's not like we didn't talk about Simon. It's not like Simon just did this deal and then no-showed. He won multiple tournaments.
He won as many tournaments as Calvin.
He did.
And won a playoff event.
And so, like, even though Calvin was, like, the better player this season overall, it's not like Simon was horribly far behind. And then there also was this big business deal that has significance and, like, reshaped what we think of Simon and, like, completely broke our expectations of what, you know, that he would just be with Discmania forever because that's where he'd been. And it shows player agency too, right? It's not a given that players are just going to stay with their sponsor just because they've been there before. Paul proved it and Simon proved it again. And I just think it was a more impactful story on the year.
I agree. And the other reason that I think there's the issue with Calvin, the Calvin storyline gains more intrigue to me, more interest, more drama when you're a weirdo who watches all disc golf and follows very, very closely and knows exactly how many strokes he went into European Open with a lead and who got up early and watched it, right? Like, so for us and the subscribers, this story holds a lot of drama, a lot of jokes, a lot of interest, because it was a very like permanent storyline. For the casual fan, though, Calvin just had a good season, and he played well. But Simon is probably, in my opinion, one of the most impactful business decisions that affects the casual viewer of the year, and that's why it is both player oriented. Because it is so player oriented, it is the only business decision that gets to continue to advance. And I agree with you that I think Simon should go to the finals.
All right, we get to the final.
This has to be the lowest seeding ever in
The 4 and the 7
of our brackets.
Kristen Grand Slam versus Simon to MVP. Well, I hold that arguably both were underseeded, but definitely Simon to MVP was underseeded. So
I think the hard part. So two things of note, right? Number one is we did use Ultiworld's traffic to determine where our first two went, and I mean there are articles about Kristen's Grand Slam, and they did not rise to the level of those others, and so I understand why we feel like it's maybe a little underseeded, but I think it's still in like the 4 makes sense based on how we did it. Simon MVP I think is underseeded because it felt like last season, like. It felt like it was taken care of before we even got into the season. I thought we'd covered it in last season's bracket, but it's just everything runs together in disc golf, and I can't remember anything. So I mean, you're right. There are reasons why they are the 4 and the 7, but they are pretty low for some very impactful on-course things.
So, Josh, I'll let you talk first here. Kristen Grand Slam versus Simon MVP.
The consistent stance that we have taken throughout this bracket, and that I think is the correct decision, especially in context of Kristen, is that the on-course performance of the sport at the end of the day should win kind of tiebreakers. And so when I have to compare with a historic deal that is the most impactful deal since Paul Macbeth, or a historic season, which is the most impactful season since Paul Macbeth. I love that. That's great to me.
That is great.
It to me is going to go to the most impactful season. The Grand Slam is something that may possibly never be done again. And I think that there's a possibility in 20 years that we look back on Simon's deal. Like Kristen's accomplishment is only going to become harder. Simon's accomplishment is only going to become easier if the trajectory continues. And to me then, like that as much as I want to focus on like just this season, the staying power of Kristen's season and the future and the longevity of it is so critical. But even if you just focus on what was talked about, like Simon kind of came and went. It was really big news, and then we were watching. He played bad at All Stars, and then like had a bad tournament, and we kind of forgot about it. And then he wins Music City Open, and we're like, oh crap! Like Simon's back. That's awesome. And then slowly kind of decreases, and we don't really talk about Simon. And we don't talk about Simon. And then the Simon line comes out, or playoffs. I don't remember which one, right? And he wins, and then the Simon line comes out, and it's really big news again. And then it gets a little bit quiet. Kristen was just always there.
The Terminator.
It was, you could not.
The Tatarminator, as Mahmoud likes to try to put it. I tell him I'm not saying that on the air.
There you go, Mahmoud. Clip that, and just play it. Like every time Kristen like makes a putt,
yeah,
soundbite. Tatarminator from Charlie. We talked about Kristen when she was there and she was winning. We talked about Kristen when she wasn't there and about why other players won because she wasn't there. It was the end all be all of disc golf this season. Kristen gets the win.
I really don't have much to add. As soon as I saw the matchup, I knew like the real final was in the semis. With Kristen versus the transgender news. I just think this is an accomplishment that deserves the praise that it's getting. And it's easy to take it for granted that she's dominating. But as amazing the seasons that we've seen from Paige not even that far back, like 2019, Paige was incredible. She didn't win all the majors. And so you have to appreciate what we've seen this year, and really over a couple of seasons now from Kristen, but it's just amazing stuff. What I'm just thinking back of some moments, at Throw Pink, which obviously she didn't win, but I think it was round 2, maybe she has to go over the water on 5, and just throws the most pure, beautiful approach shot to like 5 feet, like. It's flexing. It's fading out right at the edge of the land, and it just slides right up to the basket. And you're like, that is just an unbelievable ability that she is showing us. That's like, people like to, there's a lot of fans out there who like think badly of FPO or like, I don't watch FPO, but you're missing out if you're not, because what Kristen is doing, sure, she doesn't throw as far as the MPOs, but in many ways, she's their equal in terms of the skills that she has relative to the power level that FPO players have. And if not their equal, they're superior. I mean, it's unquestionable that Kristen had a better season than Calvin. It's amazing stuff.
The other thing that I think is so amazing as well is like, it's not flashy. I mean, you describe crazy and incredible moments, but her game, we've talked about it with Brian. We've talked about on the show. Her game is replicable. Other players could learn to do this, but it requires a level of execution that is so high in every facet of the game that she never has to make hero shots. She doesn't need the distance. It is consistent. It is robotic, and it is excellence.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So great stuff. And congratulations to Kristen's fantastic season for winning the Upshot Storylines bracket here in 2023. Join us for our Inside the Circle segment, where we dive into this year's bracket versus last year's bracket and think about kind of like the combined, like maybe we'll take the semis and look at them against each other.
That's what we did last year.
It's going to be fun as we review what we saw last year, what we saw this year, and what feels like the bigger stories. Were they bigger last year or this year? We'll talk about all that for Ultiworld Disc Golf subscribers. Go to discgolf.ultiworld.com/subscribe to sign up today. It's less than $4 a month. So cheap. Jump in. Get an annual, save 2 months free. And we'll see you in the Discord as well. Thanks, everybody.